Welcome to the Frequency Architecture Series, Part 3, talking about the economics and how the network of frequency works as a whole. So before we get into that, let's do a quick refresher. Back to Part 1, users and identity. Right? This is that idea that users are represented by the 64-bit identifier, and that all of their data either comes out of that 64-bit identifier and is attached to it, or it is referenced back to it. That gives that user and identity, that sovereignty, and how the information is structured. Then we talked about applications on frequency and how applications are built, how they interact with the shared state of the blockchain, how users get choice and always have that ultimate ability to go direct to the chain to revoke a delegation or other data that they wish not to be there. So now we're going to get into how does the network of this blockchain actually work? How does the infrastructure that needs to be paid for get paid for, right? And that's kind of the core piece of the economics we're talking about today, right? How can we understand the costs and who pays for those costs? So we can look at who the actors are, right? We have a couple different actors, and we can kind of go back to this diagram and we can point out some of the actors we have. First, we have users, right? The users themselves are actors who are engaging in the system. We have the applications themselves that are interacting on behalf of the users and interacting with the blockchain. And of course, we have the blockchain itself. And that blockchain, once again, it has these real world costs. Those costs, because the infrastructure exists in the real world, it has real costs. And so, good question. Who wants to pay for this, right? And the answer easily is that nobody wants to pay for it, right? But we can look at in right? The actor of users, we saw those. Should content creators or consumers pay for it? What about applications? Are they, in a place to pay for the infrastructure costs? Maybe government should pay. Maybe this should be something that is just available through tax dollars like roads are. And then finally, this last idea here of network, a little bit of a teaser for what's coming later. Before we find out who actually is going to pay for the infrastructure costs on frequency, let's look back at the Web 2 model. Right? The Web 2 model says it's free for users. Users just get to use all of these social applications and such, and it doesn't cost them any. Well, okay, that's a lie, obviously. We all know this. Users do pay in the Web 2 model, right? Users pay with their data, they pay with their attention. And we can actually model this in a very simplified way, right? With this, we have an application, right? That application gives services to users. Those users give their attention back to the application. The application then sells that attention space to advertisers who in turn give money to the application. That application then pays for its infrastructure and maintenance costs. And as most companies wish to do, they wish to make a profit, right? Now, this is very simplified. It's obviously much more complex than this, but it kind of gets an idea of who is paying for the cost. Where's the money coming from in the Web 2 model for most Web 2 systems, not just social media? So let's look at the Web 3 model, right? The Web 3 model is extremely, again, simplified here. But the idea of the Web 3 was that the users have more power when they pay for fees directly, right? So the users, they pay the fees to the blockchain, they get services out of that. Don't want to pay as many fees, don't do as much stuff. However, as nice as this Web 3 model is for some things like monetary transfers and other actions that the user wants the individual action to take, there's a Web 3 problem for shared data. Shared data has value not in the individual parts. You don't have value out of a single post or a single reaction in the case of social media, but shared data, it's the whole that has the value. So how can we value this share data when the individual transactions that are happening aren't worth anything, but they have to be combined. So with frequency, it takes a different approach. And it says instead of users paying, instead of necessarily applications paying, it says the cost should be shared by the entire network. Now, this is a very different way to engage with blockchain. It's a very different way to kind of think about how do we share costs for shared value. And the answer of how frequency does it in the specifics is a system called capacity. And capacity is very simple. It's a rate limited model instead of a transaction fee model, right? And we're used to this model. We think of, oh, I can buy a movie or I can rent a single movie. Oh, or I can go buy a subscription and I can kind of get a certain number of movies at some form of a rate limit, right? APIs follow this all the time. Instead of charging for individual API calls, it's a call. It's, hey, you get this many calls for this much. You get, the next 1,000, 10,000 calls are this much. And so this rate limit model has actually worked really well already in many places. And the question is kind of how do we engage with frequency to make this same thing happen? So here's again, very simplified model of how it works. Applications give services to users. No surprise there. The users get choice between which applications they're using. Those applications then get and stake tokens to the frequency blockchain, and the blockchain offers in return limited rate capacity, rate limited capacity. The blockchain, though, still has to break, there's still those real world infrastructure costs. So it inflates the token, it creates new tokens to pay for the infrastructure. What that means is that the costs of paying for the infrastructure are spread across all of the network. And so we have a system that offers shared cost to get shared benefits. Just place to stay for a second, right? This idea of we share the cost to share the benefits is a collaboration. It's a coordination between many different organizations and people to bring together a shared ability to share this data and share the benefits without worrying about the individual actions that are happening necessarily in between. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics of how applications get capacity. There's a couple different ways the applications can stake, as we saw in that little diagram. There's the ability for users to boost and give additional capacity to applications that they wish to support, and others could stake and boost. They don't have to be the applications themselves. Anyone is able to do these actions to support applications that they want to. Now, I know what you might be thinking right now. You might be thinking, wait, users don't have to be involved? Wait a second. What is this about? And that brings up the key piece, right? We talked about last time the idea that users have application choice, but that application choice goes beyond the idea of just pure ability to choose. I like this interface better than this interface. I like that moderation policy better than this moderation policy. But it actually gives economic choice to the users as well, right? The applications can build a relationship with their users to best fit their users. Maybe that isn't traditional ad-based system, right? There are many people for whom paying a subscription or something like that just isn't a viable option. And so an ad-supported system may be great. Or it may be that they're building a subscription model or a nonprofit model or some special type of ad model that we haven't seen before. Anything you want could be built because the network doesn't get involved with defining the economic relationship between a user and an application. So at the end, this brings us to a place where frequency enables these shared costs to build a shared network with this economic and application choice for users. Such an exciting kind of place to get to from both user freedom, application freedom, and the ability to collectively build a better future. So that's the economics in a nutshell. Obviously, a lot of that's simplified. If you wish to hear and read more about the specific details of how does this actually work in reality, the documentation on docs.frequency.xyz is available to go read. It's got a lot more details about how capacity works and where the funding comes from and how to build the shared network. And next time, we're going to talk about frequency data. We're going to get a little bit deeper into the details of how does frequency actually deal with data? How are data structures defined? How can I define my own data structures to flow through the shared data? And we'll be talking about that in series part 4.